This video is just a quick explanation of your midterm, the news media report. It's not going to be as long as the regular videos. I just include this because for some people it can be difficult to really understand an assignment if you're only reading it. So you'll find this if you go to Content, Assignments, and scroll down to News Media Reports. This does count as your midterm. This is due November 11th. So I came up with this because I'm really disturbed by the low quality of our news media today, the way in which they seem more concerned with grabbing people's attention than actually providing quality information. And I think that one of my jobs as an educator is to really teach students about that and teach them to be a little bit smarter. Have them look at the news media coverage that's available to them and compare it to the really quality information that I'm providing you in this course in order to assess how they're doing on women's issues. So, and as I said, I think the stakes are high. So looking here, this is my rationale. It says the information available from news media sources determine our access to knowledge about current events around the world and therefore our ability to participate fully in the political process. Full and free access to information is a necessary component of any just society. So for your midterm essay, you will assess a contemporary news media outlet for the quality of its coverage of women's issues. So I want you to understand you are only going to pick one news media outlet and discuss that in depth. Do not attempt to pick more than one of these. Pick only one. If you don't see something that strikes your fancy, feel free to choose something else, but do email me for approval. Okay. I've tried to include a range of outlets, including traditional news, traditional print. All right, the New York Times, the Denver Post, and the Coloradan. So, you know, a national, a regional, and a local, the Fort Collins. Some online, so Huffington Post and Breitbart News, which are both online sources, kind of from opposite ends of the political spectrum. The Atlantic, which is a magazine, and then some television news, right? So we have MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. Those would be your kind of cable news outlets. BBC News is more of an international outlet. 9 News, of course, the local, and NPR, again, a national radio station, actually. So I thought it might be interesting to include that. As I said, I'm very open to suggestions of other outlets if someone is really interested in working on that outlet and assessing it for women's issues. I want you to be able to work on what you would like, but I do require that you stick to one outlet, do one thing, do it well. It's only a midterm, and if and when you decide to write a book analyzing all news media, you can make a bigger project. But the narrower the scope here, the better. I would like you to read or view a sample of your outlet's coverage and record your observations. Now, you might need to scale this back a little bit, okay? So for your television news, maybe you want to watch media coverage for a week and just assess in that week what was the quality of the coverage of those news stories that week. You may want to go back back, a month or so and look at a couple of previous issues of The Atlantic. Those are the ways that I'm hoping that you'll do it. I want you to spend about 5 to 10 hours looking at the sample before you even start writing, and then I'm assuming you'll spend some time going back to it. You're going to discuss the medium and the history of your outlet. Now, in that regard, that's probably the one place where you may have some outside research. Of course, we've discussed we're discussing in our activist tools the importance of television online and some of the ethics of those. Describe the overall political slant of the source. And how do you know? Now, this is this is something that really should be your opinion, okay? That I'm asking you to make an argument. You don't necessarily need to do outside research. Other news media is acceptable in terms of sources. And then assess the level of information provided to the public and the depth of coverage. What topics or issues are addressed frequently? How frequent is the coverage of women's issues? And are women reporters well represented in the headlines? What I think you'll find most helpful for this is to, rather than believing that you have to completely start from scratch and do new research on every women's issue ever, the meat and bones of this is really assessing it in regards to our reading. So you have what I think are some of the best sources for women's issues. You have the academic articles that I assign and the Ms. articles as well that are frequently written by scholars in the field. And those will give you some real idea of what women's issues are. And then as you assess your news media source, you want to compare and contrast that to the kind of more reliable sources that I'm presenting you with. And I want you to use mostly that for the basis. Of course, you can see in some places that there is space for some outside research, both news outlet as well as peer-reviewed. Now, a little word about that. In this class, I am less strict about peer review than I am in my introductory class. I certainly hope that you learn what peer review is, but in this class, I'm asking you to be a little bit more sophisticated in your evaluation of sources. So it's not just, is it peer reviewed, is it not peer reviewed? Peer-reviewed sources can have their own biases as well, which is something that you'll learn about as you, if you continue on in academia. You'll learn about the politics of the different fields and what their investments are and who the leaders are and what their investments are. But for our purposes, I want you to really think intelligently about who the sources are, who they're speaking for, and how you really would evaluate the source. So there's no easy answers here. There's no peer-reviewed, not peer-reviewed. It really does come down to you and to your own assessment and evaluation. Where I will give you a lot of guidelines, however, is in the composition of your essay. I've been doing this a while, and I have done a lot of writing myself, and I find that the best way to do it is to stick to some of the formal rules, at least until you are comfortable enough to break the rules. Okay, so I recommend that in your thesis statement, a well-structured essay should include a thesis statement. In your thesis statement, you should evaluate the outlet's quality as a source for women's issues. In your conclusion, you should summarize your evaluation of the outlet and restate your argument. Now, in the way that I've taught you a little bit about how to read academic papers and how they're structured, right? I've taught you that idea of read the introduction, read the conclusion, look at the sectioning, look at the first sentence of every paragraph. Well, that doesn't happen accidentally. Those writers have learned those tricks too, and that's an effective tool of communication. And that's what I would also like to see you do. Okay, so look at the writers that we've read for models. Each paragraph in between your introduction and conclusion should contain an introductory and concluding sentence that express the main idea of the paragraph. And then each paragraph should contain some context, evidence, and discussion. I don't want to review everything about the basics of writing, but I do want to encourage you to submit a draft to me if you feel necessary. Make sure that I get it at least a week in advance if you want me to be able to look at it and give you some really high quality comments on it. And feel free to ask any questions that you have at all. The due date is Saturday, November 11th by 8 p.m. in Dropbox. It's 3 to 4 pages. Please stick to any reasonable font, 12-point, double-spaced, 1-inch margins. Really, want to make sure that we are not trying to use tricks to artificially make the paper longer than what it actually is, because ultimately that will hurt you when it comes to grading, because there won't be enough substantive discussion of the issues in light of the readings that I've assigned. And again, citations, any style, but be consistent. So please let me know if you have any additional questions. I want to make sure that everyone has everything that they need to succeed.